Yes. Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Hanna. I am a product manager at the Ontario Digital Service, which surprisingly doesn't have much representation here tonight. I am a product manager, if I didn't say it already, working on Ontario.ca and the developer tools and experiences that we provide to the rest of the enterprise of government, help them all build for Ontario.ca. So if you want to get nerdy about React frameworks, I'm your guy. I am grateful for the fine people of Civic Tech Toronto for having me here tonight. I'm interviewing Marco. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably it. I'm introducing you, Marco Palermo. Marco Palermo, you are the Deputy Chief Technology Officer at the City of Toronto. You've been in that role for about a year, a little over a year, since October of last year, but you've been with the city for 20 years. Can you walk me through a bit of that career journey?
Oh, it's been a journey. So I've been with the city for 20 years. Prior to that, I did one stint on my own doing app development, but I started in technology in the election area, to be honest with you, and then slowly kind of grew from there. Worked in city clerks and the policy space, but I went to school for software engineering. I mean, I had to get back to that. I loved that. That's what I did prior to joining the city, was app development. And I think through my growth in the city, and believe it or not, 20 years ago, we talked about SharePoint, right? Oh, we're going to use SharePoint. It's going to be this great thing. 20 years ago, SharePoint was...
We're still having those conversations.
So that's where I'm going, right? This is where I'm going with this. Fast forward, and as I moved through my career, I did come back to school. Then I went back to the City of Toronto and transitioned to technology services at that point. And I started to realize things are taking a long time. And I think that's what triggered me to say, where do I want to go with my career? What do I want to do? And why do I want to stay at the city? Because it was one of those things where I said, well, I noticed the people upstairs are making some decisions, but we're not really changing what we do, right? It's the same decisions, but not changing how we get there. And so that was kind of my idea to say, you know what? I want to start moving into a role where I can start making some change, and hopefully for the faster, especially with given the stigma around government work. But then as you start to grow, so then I start to get a small team, and at that point we're working on digital payments, and the commodity was killing me, right? Like I loved working with the team, the stuff we were doing, and I realized that in addition to wanting to make change, now it was about making change for the team that I was with. Because I started growing, like the more I started to build and work with larger teams, it was like, oh my God, okay, we've got this great team. Let's move to that next level to see if we can do it at a bigger scale. And that's kind of been why I've wanted to move up, is to make change just with how we deliver product.
Awesome, yeah. Great. So we have a bunch of crowdsourced questions tonight. We only have about 30 minutes, so hopefully we can get to them all, but you will have a lot of questions to get through. We will take them as we can. So you talked a lot about the team dynamics just now. One of the big shifts that we've kind of seen over that career arc that you just laid out for us is really that emphasis that we kind of now put on the cross-functional teams that are necessary for building and operating digital services. Everything from like technical talent, product management, design, analytics, data science, all these things. Attracting that kind of talent can be really difficult at the best of times, and it's especially difficult in the public sector. How are you thinking about, or how's the city thinking about that kind of challenge?
Yeah, I mean, that is a real challenge. I think that's a challenge all the way around, though.
Absolutely.
I think, right, like attracting good talent is very difficult to do, I think, in any industry, but certainly public sector, right? I mean, if we're calling a spade, the salaries aren't necessarily what the private tech sector and tech industry is. But there's compensating factors. And I am going to go there for a second and say, I've been with the city for 20 years. There's things that keep me there, and it's not just about the fact that I love what I do, but what I think many need to realize is get in young, and then there's opportunities for the future, i.e. we do have, great opportunities, pension, benefits, things like that. So there's things that we have to start selling that maybe we don't. And I'm going there for a second because sometimes money lures people, and I think to this crowd, probably not the case. I think the crowd here is about engagement, right? So that's not a second thing. It's selling what we do. I mean, many of you have worked with our open data team. And, it's funny, I was talking to a member on the team earlier just tonight, right here, and we were saying how what our team has done compared to worldwide amplifies that from the tech perspective, what they've implemented is crazy. And I have to tell you, I'm super excited about that. So I think that's the other thing, is promoting what we've done internally from a tech perspective, to show that what we're doing, not only do you get to make change for the public, which is pretty wild, right? When you see some of the change and the impact it has, and you get those public comments, which unfortunately not only just comes on Twitter, but goes in the media as well. But then you see the public impact that you're having. That is something that we have to try and sell to attract that talent. It is difficult. But the other thing too is, when you create an environment, and I think this is where something that's really important to me, when you create that environment of empowering the team to do stuff, that's how you start to get the word out from that team to be like, hey, you need to understand, working here is not just about getting a paycheck. Mm-hmm. There's a whole cultural aspect that really amplifies the value that you can get in a public serving job.
So talk to me about some of those really impactful projects that might entice somebody from the private sector. How are you thinking about serving for a very different and much wider group of users than, say, a narrowly focused consumer product? And what kind of impacts are you sort of looking for with your?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Great question. So first of all, every little thing you don't necessarily realize. Look, I'll tell you, when I started in the public sector, before I started my career, I should say, when I came out of university, I was like, I'm going to be building robots. It's sweet, right? Like, that's why I went into tech. I want to do all this crazy stuff, and I did do the App Store right when it came about. When you fast forward to the beginning of the pandemic, okay, and the beginning of the pandemic was nuts, and that was like a turning point for me a little bit in my career, which seems weird because it wasn't too long ago. Maybe it's not a turning point in my career as much as the light bulb went off to say, oh, wow, like, I knew we did cool things, knew we helped the public. In 5 days, I worked closely with the team. We sat right beside our public health members. And in 5 days, we literally built a full-on application, top to bottom, that managed all the COVID cases so that we could track and so on. And one of the things that happened was, we released this thing. It was not really believed that we could do it. And somebody very senior in public health came to us and said, I don't think you guys understand, but what you've just done is saved lives. And that kind of hits you, right? Like, you don't realize that, of course, there's medical field that you can get into for technology. But we had built an application that helped our public health members manage and track COVID cases to ensure that we're dealing with the pandemic in a proper and efficient way. And so that was something that was very impactful. The other ones, though, if you look at it, could everybody has a different need from the city. I'll use this one because so many people are talking about snow. We built in-house plow TO. I mean, that's kind of cool. Yeah. You have our team in-house built from scratch, leveraging existing industry technologies and APIs, but they built the framework, right? So you had a product team who's kind of saying what this thing should look like. You had a technical team that's like, oh, sweet, I get to build my own framework for spinning up what we call quick maps. It's our little in-house product. And then they've got this thing that's showing exactly where trucks are and giving that. And so that's a big deal, especially as we go in, and winter maintenance is such a big deal for the city of Toronto. Of course, then you look at your big ones. And for the longest time, to get a service request in, you had to call 311, right? Well, during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, we had completely revamped the 311 solution in partnerships with our 311 team, who were great partners, business partners, by the way, and stood up top to bottom a fully integrated CRM that had a public-facing site that was entirely integrated with the city's website to give you that seamless experience, but now allows people to upload images, submit the service request from, the subways now, because you've got some cellular signal. But you can imagine all of this effort to make such a big solution where before you used to have to pick up the phone, you can do it right from your mobile device or desktop.
Walk me through a bit of the process of actually delivering and like that? I know like at the province level, we have just a constellation of stakeholders, both like the bureaucrats, but also the political folks, and everyone has a bit of a different priority goals that don't always align or come together. And when you're building, a big prolific app like that, I mean, snow is something that we all deal with, and imagine sort of like your app kind of cuts across a lot of different concerns, a lot of different departments. What was that experience like, kind of getting it from the idea out to the app store?
A nightmare. Is that
say more?
Has anybody worked on large projects with cross-functional? Obviously, Kevin has. When you have multiple stakeholders and everybody is very opinionated, and you're working with super smart people, on top of that, software engineers in the room, hands up, software engineers. Yeah, we have big egos, so we're always right, by the way. But when you combine all that into a room of people who are in the public sector, and for 80% or more are there to do good, they're all battling for their opinion because they believe it's the right thing. So let's talk a bit about that process. So first of all, this was driven by our 311 team. They knew that they needed to deliver a more efficient service and more options to the public, right? So we started off with a little bit of a waterfall-esque approach, which everybody in this room, and I'm looking at this crowd and everybody looks young. So whatever you do, if somebody says water will fall, leave the room. Okay? It's not efficient at all. With this project, we had the opportunity to change the business a little bit. Say, look, okay, let's see your requirements, but let's put these in the way of being able to deliver step by step. Every 2-3 weeks, you're going to see something. And I tell you why I mention this. Given those different requirements that come in, and when you have such a big project where you have the line of business who has to deliver a service, which is take in service requests to be able to respond, but behind the scenes, you have multiple lines of business who are actually delivering those services, whether it's transportation or solid waste group. They have their own requirements. When you do it in an agile format, what we found was we would realize, oh wait, we didn't bring in solid waste for this one. So you'd go grab a few people to say, how do you pivot this? Now the project took about a little over, I think it was 17 months to deliver. It was a long project, but the thing is, it didn't feel long because we were slowly incrementing and seeing a different solution every 3 weeks, right? But what it allowed us to do is realize where we were missing steps. So we went out, we had this beautiful design. It was great. The UI folks designed it beautifully with our CX folks who were getting customer feedback. But then we looked around the table and said, where's our StratCom folks? Because we're about to release a solution that doesn't follow corporate branding necessarily. And so you fall on your face, but you fail quickly and you pick back up. You bring the StratCom, you make sure that everything, are we okay? We know we didn't include you from the beginning, but we want your input now. And I have to tell you, there were certainly tough conversations. There's always tough conversations with those. But the willingness and want to drive forward, to respect that, yeah, we made a mistake, we didn't include you, was so important. And I think that's where you have some of the leadership that would come in and say, look, this wasn't intentional. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So in 18 months, we released this monster solution. And it is a monster solution, delivered 100 services online for service requests. There were a lot of tough conversations, but because we followed that kind of iterative step by step, it allowed us to pivot and realize where we were failing to get people back.
How are you, in a sort of like a really highly matrix sort of situation like that, how are you thinking about ideas around product partnership when you are sort of bringing together all of these disparate groups that all have different services that kind of need to run through your product?
Yeah.
How do you make decisions? How do you prioritize?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, with the way certainly we look at products is there's always a sponsor group, and that's where those decisions would initially come from. And that's who your product owner is going to be, who sits in the sprint meetings. It is difficult, if I'm being honest with you. And I think oftentimes we do have to have that escalation to be able to ease kind of, I don't know if you want to call it egos, but you got to ease some of the tension in the room, and then hopefully give different perspectives in regards to how you get past who's going to own the product, who's going to make decisions. But like I said, typically with every project we have, we do have a product owner who's typically the core sponsor, right, of that initiative. In this case, it was the 311 division who kind of owned that product, brought in different parties and asked for opinions and input, but ultimately made the decisions to help us move forward. What was key though is ensuring that it was inclusive. So we had a customer experience team, let them go out and do some research. We had our Stratcom team, let them come in and put in their input as it relates to branding. And then that product owner would say yes, no, and that's how you move forward with those decisions.
Great. So maybe tying it back to what we were talking about around the idea around digital talent, you've kind of outlined a lot of the positives of kind of working for the city or working in the public space. You've also highlighted a lot of the challenges of just digital delivery in that space as well. What are some things that people who might be in the private sector and considering a move to the public sector might struggle with in that transition, or what kind of advice might you have for them?
Patience. Patience. You know what? We recently have our new CTO, Sonia, who's come in. She's great. But did come from private sector, and the way she's adapting has been fabulous, right? And the plus side is bringing a different perspective, challenging the norms. But I would think for anybody in the private sector, be ready for that challenge, because it's a very different pace, and it's not for any bad reason. It's because policies and so on are put in place because we're using public money. We're not using shareholder money who just want to make a profit, right? So they're trusting us to do that. What the public are trusting us to do is to do things lean, but also give them everything they want, which is really hard to do, right? And so some of the things that, to be ready for when you come in is, the simple buying of a tool is not that simple, right? You need Jira, great. It's going to cost money, and therefore we have to go through a whole process just to get a license, right? The flip side to it. The flip side to it is the reward you get with one, you work with like-minded people. Right? So that's one thing. The second thing is understand when you come in, you're making a difference to people who actually really need it. I've been involved. I mean, I mentioned the application we did for the pandemic, but on a day-to-day basis, we work on different applications that help make it easier for those in a vulnerable position to get service from the city. And we're trying to digitize. We have public Wi-Fi going out, right? Gives an opportunity for those who may not have access to internet, quick access to internet. And so those are the things you really, on a day-to-day, when you go home and you might be frustrated to say, geez, this is taking forever, right? But you go home and you have to flip that and say, but I'm making a difference, right? And that's the key. And that's a decision you have to make. And sometimes come in, I read a great book recently, but, the author said, I talked about a number of people who come in, they do their 1-2 years of public service, and then they go back out. Right, and maybe that's what it is for an individual in the private sector.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit,
Sure.
Maybe not that much, but cybersecurity. So cybersecurity obviously is a major concern for any organization, but it's especially important for public institutions that you often have to sort of meet a higher level of trust. I've been watching the incident at the Toronto Public Library kind of unfold chaotically over the last more than a month at this point. What's your response to that situation, and what lessons should we be taking away from it?
For sure. Why don't I focus on private cybersecurity as opposed to that incident?
Fair enough.
Only because I'm not in a position to talk about it. So I want to be transparent about that. One of the big things that going back to, I was a manager of our digital technology services group. And also talking about, again, developers having egos. We had brilliant people. We really do. I have to tell you, you'd be surprised by the talent at the City of Toronto. I'm blown away daily. You have a number of those individuals in this room, but also people that are not here. But like every software engineer, as I said, or anybody putting a product together, they're very proud of what they do. And I'm telling this story because I remember vividly what would happen is I'd have a developer come up and say, hey, look what I did. I ripped this out in a couple of days. It's amazing. and they'd be all proud. And I do tend to get in the weeds with these guys. And I'd say, this is awesome. And I turn to the QA person and I'd say, break it. Right in front of the developer. And it's for two reasons. One, I had to learn in a tough way in my career. If I want to get up, you got to drop the ego. So it's a little bit of that learning, right? And of course, I do it in jest with the developer. I don't make sure they realize it's a bit in jest, but also to learn. But two, it was to realize that we have to make sure perfect, because if not perfect or near perfect, unfortunately, it's not something you just sweep under and quickly release. It's potentially in the media, right? So this now tailors into cybersecurity. We've been very fortunate at the city, to be honest with you, to have a very talented office of the CISO, very talented. And we have a number of individuals and teams there in different areas that perform different tests and assessments on the solutions that we build. Every solution that we implement goes through the office of CISO for review, whether for its privacy assessment, a vulnerability assessment on the application, or any other type of risk assessment that we may take. This, I think, is imperative everywhere. And I think everybody should realize that, especially being in public sector, especially now with Gen AI making it super easy, which I think is why we're starting to see like this rapid growth of attacks. So I think that's one thing I would say is how we tackle it is to really partner up closely with our offices of CISO, to lean in and accept that we aren't perfect. So we've got to make sure we leverage those resources, and then to test and be ready to pivot on an instant to be able to address any vulnerabilities that pop up.
Yeah. Has the process ever gone wrong in your experience? Like, I know you said you've been lucky, but
yeah.
Any sort of examples where things maybe didn't quite go as planned?
Trying to think here. There was one where unfortunately we weren't caught up. So let's put it that way.
Right.
We did have a scenario where we had tested a series of apps that leveraged APIs, and there was an unfortunate incident where a test on, and man, we must have done 100 apps that were fine, went through the assessments fine, but in one scenario it called out a vulnerability that wasn't caught previously. We were able to check to make sure it was never exposed. But that just tells you that we did all the right things and it was just missed. And it happened to be because it just, a different tester using the tool a different way drew out something that was potentially, and it was a low vulnerability, but they did expose it. So we pivoted, and that was unfortunately was in production. Nothing caught, no issues. So, knock on wood on that. But we were able to address it, and we addressed it within hours, right? So that just tells you, again, going back to the talent, but also thinking about when you're implementing, how do you build for scale and efficiency, knowing that we do not have close to the capacity that any tech group has. The only other thing, I had another one on, I will say there was another scenario that we went through where, this is more of a good news story. It wasn't a product that we produced. We were leveraging a vendor product. And the only reason I bring it up is just to outline kind of the due diligence of the city. We had a member pop up a scenario where they caught something that was not normal. I'm being very vague on purpose, and I apologize. But I want to tell the story more about just, again, how we monitor things. Daily, this individual would monitor a particular solution, and something seemed out of the norm. And we contacted the vendor, and they kind of said, no big deal, but turned out to be a bigger deal. And so, because of that, it was this one individual in the city that was able to identify something that looked wrong, that ended up the vendor finding out, oh, geez, we've got to deal with this at a global level. It was a global incident. But it was the city of Toronto who identified it for them, and that just tells you it's the type of talent and the due diligence that this team plays to make sure we're delivering a service that's protected and protecting city information and resident information.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to shift gears again. You mentioned in your message to this community that you are an avid reader. You recently read Jennifer Palka's book, Recoding America.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Jennifer Palka served as the deputy CTO for the Obama White House and founded Code for America. what were some of your takeaways from reading the book?
Oh my God, this is my life. I read this book, and I swear every time I turned a page and I read it, and I was like, I've lived this whole thing, and everything she talked about was truly about the roadblocks that we've kind of put in place. Now, in America or in the US, they do. I think maybe there's more policies or different bylaws that are put in place, and I forget, and I should know this because it wasn't too long ago that I read it. But there was a particular law that was put in place that outlined outsourcing, outsourcing digital, yes, right? And I read it and went, oh my gosh, like why would you ever do that? And there's reasons you do that. Don't get me wrong. And even again, we don't have massive confidence. The big thing that I took from this book that I think everybody should know, everybody should read it because it really does tell the story, and it also tells about how things are pivoting, because it talks about, towards the end of her book, she talks about how the US is starting to pivot now, and they're starting to say, wait a second, why don't we have digital centers inside of government, right? And this is a struggle I think certainly municipal government, federal government, and provincial governments face, and you're seeing that. Ontario Digital, right? Like this is not a long-standing group. It's one that's come up recently. I can tell you that even we have a group, Digital Government and Modernization, that's only 2 years old, because there's this realization in her book where she says that is now changing, because what they've seen in the US is these massive projects that take years, go well beyond budget, and she references a number of them that relate to the Defense Department and so on, that are still going, and they're billions of dollars in, and it was supposed to be done 5, 6, 7 years ago. And so it's this idea, the book talks about this idea of, this is why there's a shift back to standing up more digital skill set inside of government, to be oversight at the very least of these vendors that come in to deliver a project, and to try to manage that change request, and also to help facilitate the businesses in how they get the requirements up front versus behind, and avoiding that waterfall type approach that leads to this, because you get 3 years, you deliver something that's already obsolete, right? Instead of taking advantage of quick MVPs. And she talks a lot about that in her book. Great book, though. I highly recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, it is great. You outlined a lot of the systemic barriers that kind of come with digital delivery, both in the book and also in sort of your own experience at the city. If you had a magic wand, you could just sort of erase some of those barriers, where would you start?
Oh man. Okay, I'm going to say this, but anybody at the city watching this, please don't take offense, but figuring out how to be faster at procurement, but also check all the boxes. And I have to tell you, I work side by side with our procurement team. And they're so good. They are so good. And they want to help us get there, but they also know that, going back to, we're spending public money. We have to be accountable. We have to be, we want the auditor to look at us and go, good job, right? But I will say, unfortunately, with the way technology, you can imagine for other groups, maybe that works, but the way technology changes, just if there was a way to just make it faster, but also check those boxes, that would be great.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So I want to talk to you a bit about some of those technology choices that are made at the city. One message that we kind of got through the crowdsourced questions highlighted the fact that a lot of the city's technology decisions are made at a corporate level, where city divisions are directed to use specific enterprise tools or software. Talk to me a bit about the trade-offs of this sort of centralized approach compared to maybe delegating them down to either the divisional level or maybe even the product or service level.
For sure. Everybody's heard of technical debt, right? So I think that the main reason why we look at centralization, and I think we want to be clear here, centralization isn't about City of Toronto, corporate IT, you're the only ones that deliver. It has nothing to do with that, right? It's about maximizing contracts so that we're more cost effective, right? And standardizing on those. For when you look at an enterprise capability, you say, look, we're going to implement a capability that, call it digital payment, right? And in that capability, we've got these two tools that do it. And anybody who needs payment as part of their solution, here's your two options. But what we're doing is we're also looking at interoperability, right? So I think everybody knows the new modern web architecture isn't those old school monolithic applications anymore. It's about componentizing everything. I don't know if componentizing is a word, but
Absolutely.
modularizing everything, right? But the idea is that you've got different components that can piece together. So while it seems like, wait, this is maybe not efficient, it actually really is. And it's not to take away from the businesses. When I talked to you about the 311 solution that we implemented, we launched that solution, which has many different components, by the way. But we launched that solution with the intent that we don't want 311 to have to come to us every time they want to add a service request and put that in. And so we started with 100 service requests. We're now up to over 550 service requests that are digital. And all we do is they say, yeah, we're ready to post this one, because of course you still need your change management to do your things, right? But we just simply click a button, it runs through, promotes to production, but they've designed that whole service request on their own, right? So where sometimes you may see that, and there may be this interpretation of, oh man, you centralize everything, it's going to go backwards. That's not actually the case. The other benefit, I think, from a centralization perspective, now going back to the previous question as it relates to cybersecurity, when you have that many applications outside, it's hard to then manage to make sure that everything's patched, kept up to date, and so on. And so we are in this world where we have to take that in consideration. And why that's so important to look at an enterprise architecture that says, how do I be efficient and fast, but also be able to ensure cybersecurity, right? Ensure ability to scale, and empower our divisions to do their own thing. It's a hard task, but I can tell you we've made successful strides in getting there by thinking it through and working closely with our divisional partners. So that's one aspect. And then again, and I'll wrap up with this one, is that the other thing too has to do with, as I talked about technical sprawl, we don't have an army of staff. And so when you start to centralize and work on same things, you can really get talented people and specific skill sets, as opposed to 5 people with 100 skill sets to manage all these things.
How do you sort of evaluate the, value that you're getting out of these centralized tools? I mean, technology moves so quickly. When is it sort of time to move on to the next generation, the next system, or sort of double down on what you've already invested in?
Yeah, I think there's often, well, one thing I'll say is platforms are a big thing right now, right? Passes are a big thing right now, and we do have to trust that our vendor partners will keep up to times with ongoing enhancements. We see every platform now probably integrates AI in some means, right? I think, how we look at whether we have to pivot, that's where you get that center of expertise in that corporate level who's constantly reviewing what we have, to try and identify and try and say, we're not seeing patches from these vendors, we're not seeing updates and keeping up. The unfortunate part, when you work in a larger organization especially, and you have looked at an enterprise platform, is that ensuring that we aren't locked into any particular vendor. And so when I talked a bit about before the architecture being very modular, we take that very seriously. It's part of our digital infrastructure strategic framework, right? The whole idea that we have to be able to pivot on a dime to not lock into vendors. How we assess, we have multiple ways of doing that, right? So what's our usage level like? And we've seen it. We've seen where things just drop right off and they become what we call rock, right? We have different needs from our clients where we say, oh, well, this is not doing it anymore. Do we have anything else in our toolkit, or do we have to move to something different?
All right, fair. You've mentioned it a couple of times already, but it really seems like the next major platform shift in computing is kind of coalescing around artificial intelligence. You must get this question all the time, but what is your plan for AI? Where does it fit into the city's technology strategy?
So this is very important. If anybody in technology, certainly at decision-making level, is not thinking about it, I'm shocked. But what I can say is this. It is very early days for AI. I think we've seen ebbs and flows. I think we've seen definite advantages to it. But we've also seen some not so great things. And while we have to get ahead of it, we have to look at opportunities for integrating to create automation, as we've talked about capacity constraints. I think the big thing for us is we are treading very lightly. And the reason being is we want to make sure that we do our thorough kind of review before releasing something out there. As we know, we don't know where data is going all the time, so we're very cautious about that. Certainly, we look to how we can leverage AI to automate more internally to deliver services faster. But as I mentioned, we're early days and really kind of getting our feet wet now. And it's taking long, but for the right reasons.
Is there anything about AI that excites you specifically?
Anything about AI that excites me?
It's great for writing like product requirements documents. It is.
So I will say, I mean, not having to overthink what my presentation layout is going to be is great. The flip side is I actually don't use it for that. Primarily because I've tried it once. In fairness, I tried it once, but I just think for me, I like to be a little bit more creative with that stuff. Look, I think AI is a game changer. Am I excited about it? Yeah. Why wouldn't I be? But there's nothing specific that excites me because I've always been. I mean, put it to you this way: I like Mac because of the Unix kernel. You know what I mean?
All right.
So
I know who you are.
you know what I'm
see
saying? So I like knowing the full knowledge of things, and not having things to automate me. But yeah, I don't really have a good answer.
That is the answer. Thank you. We are coming to sort of the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. Sort of last question for you. What role do you see for a community like this, sort of like the local civic tech community in Toronto, have in sort of like the city's digital transformation? Or sort of like, how can this community support the city?
Man, so many ways. One thing is engage with our open data team. And for those who haven't, I imagine everybody's gone to our open data portal. I mean, in this room, I imagine so, right? Super rich. There's 461 data sets, right? With me, yeah. Right? For over 2,000 cuts. They did give me an envelope to do this, by the way. No, over 2,000 cuts of that. There's so many options, and we, again, going back to that limited talent, just from a capacity perspective, there's so many things that you guys could probably think about and give us ideas for, or we can start talking about how do we partner. I think, I know previously, Sonia had given a talk recently about encouraging our vendors to be more partners. That isn't just vendors. That's, I think, everybody in this room to say, hey, come up with us with a good idea. Can we figure out a way to partner and deliver? And we're trying to release data to empower you to do that, to come up with those ideas. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, I can't tell you how much I encourage you to apply and understand the culture we have at the city. Because the opportunities are coming. The vibe is amazing at the city, and then when you get to work on that stuff and bring your ideas, I think you'll be very encouraged. So I think that's the other thing is don't step back and go, I don't know if I want to do this. Just go full in. Provide us your ideas, whether it's through the open data, Twitter feed or whatnot. Or coming to us directly and emailing, and more importantly, definitely look at the roles that are available and apply.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Marco, thank you so much for your time tonight.
This is great.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.